Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take sources you send us and really try to, well, extract the key insights.
That's right.
So today we're digging into the perspective of a Dutch politician, Thierry, based on a transcript from Omroep Pauwnet on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And our mission, really, is to get a handle on his experiences with the media and this whole idea that politicians are, becoming a bit robotic.
Yeah, it's always interesting to get that kind of direct insight, isn't it? Hearing a politician reflect on, well, how they see the media and how the media sees them.
Exactly. It feels less filtered than usual press releases or sound bites.
Definitely. You get a better sense of the pressures, the perceptions.
So one of the first things that jumps out is Thierry saying it's been 5 years since he was last in that specific studio.
5 years, that's quite a while in politics.
It is. And he seemed genuinely surprised by some changes, like you mentioned the gender-neutral restroom as something that made him feel, well, a little out of step, maybe.
Interesting detail. Sort of a small signifier of bigger shifts, perhaps?
Could be. And get this, he brought his wife along. He said he did it because he almost couldn't believe they'd actually invited him back.
Wow. Okay, that says a lot, doesn't it? About his perception of his relationship with that outlet anyway.
It really does. It points to this potential gap between, how he feels he's viewed and the actual invitation.
Yeah, what kind of narrative builds up around someone to make them feel like an unwelcome guest, even when invited?
Good question. And the host, Rick, he's pretty open about why he invited Thierry. Listener requests, apparently.
The audience asking for it.
Yeah, that and just the fact Thierry hadn't been on before. But Rick also admits he was a bit worried about it.
Worried about interviewing a politician?
Yeah, worried about potential backlash. He kind of hinted it might be seen as a deformity in their usual lineup.
A deformity, strong word.
It is. He even said he had to ask permission. And he made this comparison explicitly saying it wasn't a direct comparison, mind you, but like the considerations around interviewing, say, really controversial historical figures.
Okay, that level of hesitation from a media host. Well, it tells a story about the current climate, doesn't it?
It sure does. This sort of self-censorship or extreme caution.
Yeah, worrying about the fallout just for platforming certain voices. It suggests media outlets are very aware of their perceived power, maybe, and the potential heat they can take.
Right. And then comes this twist. Rick brings up a recent poll.
Okay.
Maurice DeHaan poll. And despite Thierry being, mostly absent from major media for about 4 years, his party is polling higher than several others.
Higher? Than who?
Well, he mentioned BBB, NSC, SGP, and Volt specifically.
So polling well, but not really visible in the mainstream media. That's interesting.
It is, isn't it? How do you square that? You've got decent public opinion numbers, but the main figure is largely off the airwaves.
It definitely makes you question the traditional link between media presence and political standing. Maybe alternative channels are playing a bigger role.
Or perhaps voters are actively looking beyond the usual suspects for information.
Could be both. And it also brings up that point the host made about media law. The idea that public broadcasters might actually be required to represent different viewpoints.
Yeah, is there a gap between the law and the practice? That's a whole other question.
For sure.
Now, Thierry himself, he has some pretty clear views on this. He really emphasizes that being in the media, engaging in debate, that's just part of the job for a politician.
Right. It's a core function, in his view.
He believes strongly in, the value of clashing opinions. Says it's healthy for democracy. And he warns about the dangers when viewpoints get shut down or censored.
Yeah, the classic marketplace of ideas concept. It's fundamental, really. And he uses examples, right?
He does. He points to the COVID-19 pandemic as a key one.
Yeah, how so?
He argues that critical voices, people questioning lockdowns or vaccines, were suppressed by the mainstream.
Right, that was a common criticism at the time.
And he contrasts that with his own podcast, it was NPO Radio 2 back then, saying they deliberately platformed diverse views. He sees that period as the start of this sort of cordon, as he puts it, around his party by TV and newspapers.
So he felt a deliberate exclusion starting then?
Seems so.
Yeah.
And he brings up the Ukraine war, too, arguing a similar thing happened. A kind of standard narrative took hold and pushed out alternative expert opinions.
These examples, whether you agree with his take on them or not, they really show his perception of media bias and, well, exclusion.
Exactly. It frames his whole experience.
It points to that wider unease some people feel about, the range of perspectives offered in mainstream news during big events.
But then there's the counter-argument, isn't there? The question Rick brings up.
Yeah.
Did Cherry's own communication style maybe play a part in him not being invited places?
Ah, yes, the self-reflection angle. How much is the system and how much is the individual?
It's a tough one. Cherry's response is interesting. He sort of acknowledges it as a possibility, but then pivots.
Pivots how?
He points out that, well, lots of other people with similar views are also excluded. So he suggests it's bigger than just his personality.
Kind of a "it's not just me" argument?
Pretty much. Though he does mention a specific past comment, the familiar Beagle one, as something that maybe didn't help. An instance where he perhaps alienated people.
So an acknowledgement of maybe a misstep there. It shows how tricky communication is, right? One comment can stick.
Definitely. Trying to be authentic, but also, not shoot yourself in the foot.
And it turns out the host, Rick, has his own story here. He shares his experience of feeling canceled, as he puts it.
Over his COVID views, right.
Exactly. Says his regular spots on that same network, and at BNR they just stopped after he voiced criticism about the pandemic response.
Wow. So Cherry's not alone in feeling that kind of pushback.
Apparently not. Rick even mentions trying to promote peace regarding Ukraine, hinting at this broader frustration with dominant narratives.
So the host's own experience really adds weight to Cherry's claims, or at least shows it's not a unique feeling.
It certainly broadens the context. Suggests that holding dissenting views, particularly on certain hot-button topics, can have real professional consequences in media.
Which brings us to, well, the big question.
Mm-hmm.
What about change? Rick pushes Cherry on this. He refers back to an earlier interview where Cherry apparently did some self-reflection.
Right. So the follow-up is, okay, you've reflected. Now what?
Exactly. What concrete actions will he take? And maybe more pointedly, is it too late?
Hmm.
Can the damage, perceived or real, actually be repaired? Especially with voters, thinking back to the 2019 elections.
That's the core of it, isn't it? Accountability, potential reconciliation. Acknowledging issues is one thing, but rebuilding trust, that's a whole other ballgame.
Cherry does seem to own up to some things. He identifies two main challenges for his party.
Which are?
Their stances on COVID and Ukraine, plus internal party divisions,
Hmm.
and then, crucially, his own personality.
Ah, so he does put himself in the mix.
He does. Admits he sometimes says or tweets things, impulsively. But he also suggests he's changed, become more composed, attributes it partly to age, being a father, that sort of thing.
Interesting. Linking personal growth to hopefully more considered political communication. It's at least an acknowledgement.
Yeah. And this leads him into that central idea, the robot metaphor.
Right. The politicians losing their humanity, becoming scripted.
Kerry talks about admiring Pim Fortuyn, seeing him as a normal person in politics, and want that kind of authenticity himself.
A relatable desire, I think. Many people crave that authenticity.
He contrasts that with politicians becoming, as he puts it, walking spin doctors or robots, just spitting out talking points. He even names another politician, Zilkins, as an example.
Using a specific name makes the critique much sharper, more concrete. It taps into that public frustration with politicians sounding, well, fake.
And Rick jumps in, agreeing. Says he remembers that politician, Dylan Zilkins, being different, more spontaneous in the past.
So a shared observation there.
Cherry then gives examples of his own attempts at being spontaneous, like sharing philosophical thoughts in Parliament.
And how did that go down?
Apparently, not always well. Sometimes got negative reactions.
Which highlights the tightrope walk, doesn't it? You try to be real, spontaneous, but the formal political environment or the media lens might just punish you for it.
Exactly. Which logically leads to the topic of media training.
Ah, the solution often proposed for politicians who struggle with communication.
Right. Cherry says he initially resisted it. Why? Because he dislikes the game of politics, the perceived artificiality, the debate club tactics.
He feels parliamentary debates aren't about real issues.
Yeah, he calls it like a debate club. Feels it's often detached from the country's actual problems. He even admits his own gut reactions, like instantly mentioning the cartel, can backfire sometimes.
That's quite self-aware, seeing how his own authenticity or maybe impulsiveness can be counterproductive in that setting.
But interestingly, despite his reservations, despite hating the game, he says he's now open to media training.
Oh, so a shift in thinking.
It seems like it. It
Yeah.
shows that tension, right? Wanting to be authentic, true to yourself, but also recognizing the practical need to communicate effectively in the system you're in.
Yeah, understanding that even the most genuine message needs to be packaged right sometimes, just to be heard.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, we've really unpacked this central struggle Cherry seems to face.
Mm-hmm. That challenge of trying to stay authentic in a media world, in a political world that often feels like it pushes towards polish, towards being well, robotic.
And we got his perspective on why diverse voices matter, his concerns about media gatekeeping, regardless of whether you agree with his specific politics or not.
Right. His experience raises broader questions about democratic discourse.
Which leads us to our final thought for you, the listener. Think about this balance. How much genuine personality do you want from a politician versus how much strategic communication, maybe even polish, is necessary?
Yeah, where's the line? When does polish become robotic? When does authenticity become counterproductive? And what are the implications for politics, for how we engage as citizens?
And crucially, what role does the media play in all of this? How does it shape what we see and how politicians behave? Something to mull over.
Definitely food for thought.
Okay, that's our deep dive for today. Thanks for tuning in.